Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going over Tarkir Dragonstorm spoilers from day 3 and day 4. Double dose of spoilers today. So let's jump right into it with our first card, Perennation, which is a 6 mana. Return target permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a hexproof counter and an indestructible counter on it. So a reanimation spell can target any permanent. You could bring back like World of Phyrexia, something big if you wanted to. But really, to take advantage of this card, you want to take advantage of the fact that you're putting a hexproof and an indestructible counter on this. The first card I thought about was Herald of Eternal Dawn, or like Platinum Angel in older formats, but that's legal in standard, so you could actually, put that into your graveyard and then turn 6 or sooner if you were able to ramp into this, get that back with a hexproof and indestructible counter on it. Now, how good is that? That's a good question. Um, Against some decks, especially like best of one, that actually might just be game over. Just that 2-card combo, they can't beat it. They have no answer in their deck. There are some cards that can stop this. That cards that like make you sacrifice a creature or anything that just exiles all creatures. Things like that could farewell, things like that, sunfall. So if they're playing those cards, then they have an out to it. Some decks just have no outs to this at all. Burn spells, anything that just targets your creature or destroys all creatures. Day of Judgment wouldn't do anything to stop the Herald of Eternal Dawn. So that'd be an interesting deck to try, especially in best of one. I think that would be a decent strategy. Against some decks, it would be terrible, and against some decks, it would just be game over. So I did make a Herald of Eternal Dawn deck a while back that kind of tried to do this with the Swift Boot, the boots that give them hexproof, and that was pretty decent-ish. Beat some decks with that, but this is definitely a cleaner way to do this with just one card, and yeah, it seems okay. So we'll see. And the Neverali's Disc is another kind of combo here. This is again way older formats, mostly like Commander, but kind of funny that if you give it an indestructible counter and you tap it to destroy everything, it doesn't destroy itself. So you can do this 1 mana, just destroy everything basically every turn over and over again. So for Commander fans, that's a fun, perhaps, interaction that you could take advantage of. Yeah, let me know in the comments below. Are there any other good targets for this? Herald of the Eternal Dawn was the only good one I could really think of in standard, at least. Platinum Angel also. But anything that you can kind of protect, I think would be decent. I mean, you could play this like at the top end curve of a deck that has like good 5 drops, and you want to get back like a big dragon with this. I don't know. Could be interesting, but a powerful effect for sure. But it is quite expensive, so maybe it's just a bit too slow for standard. I'm not sure. Okay, next up we've got Zurgo Thunder's Decree, which is a 3 mana red, white, and black 2/4 with Mobilize 2. So when you attacks, you get 2/1/1 red warrior creature tokens. You sacrifice them at the beginning of your end step. However, it says during your end step, warrior tokens you control have this token can't be sacrificed. So you actually, if you attack with this guy, you get them, but then you don't have to sacrifice them. So that's pretty cool at the end of the turn. So then you essentially are just having a 4/4. Now, to attack with this guy is a little sketchy sometimes if your opponent has a blocker, like if they just have a 4/4 back to block it, that's not a great attack, right? So you do have to attack with it. You could play cards like the Coyote that give it haste, things like that, to attack right away. It does really curve nicely too, also with the other cards with Mobilize, Voice of Victory here, for example. And we also got another one, the Pack Beasts up here with Mobilize for 3. So other cards with Mobilize work pretty well with this because um, if you went, say, turn 2 Voice, turn 3 play this, attack with Voice, if they weren't able to block it, um, then you get those tokens. Those soldier tokens also wouldn't be sacrificed. So then all the Mobilize triggers are now just creating this huge board for you. That's pretty powerful. So definitely something to consider. Of course, like War Leader's Call, pretty good, as I pointed out with Voice of the Victory. The Pack Beast is a really interesting card by itself. 3 mana to create basically 4 bodies on the battlefield. So that's kind of an interesting one. I was thinking all these cards would be kind of sweet with Devilish Valet, like in Pioneer. Um, if you wanted to make some fun Devilish Valet deck, probably wouldn't be the best, but I love that card. Obviously, super fun and just a way to create a ton of tokens all in the same turn during your attack step, which would trigger. You only basically need like 4 or 5 tokens that come into play for Devilish Valet to be a lethal attack. So it's actually not that hard. The Pack Beast by itself is pretty decent if you had like played that on 3 and then you played Devilish Valet and then another 1-drop you attacked. That would give you 4 alliance triggers. So something to think about as well. But yeah, let me know. What do you guys think about the Mobilize mechanics so far? There's another Mobilize card that I'll talk about later in the video that I think is pretty decent as well. But so far, it looks pretty good to me, and could be pretty nice for an aggressive deck or different sort of like aristocrat style decks or token decks. But this one, like Zurgo, you wouldn't want to play that in an aristocrat style deck because then you're not sacrificing the token. So kind of interesting one. Okay, next up we've got Glacierwood Siege, which is 3 mana. That unfortunate casting cost, as people are pointing out to me, um, which is the 1 green, 1 blue, 1 colorless casting cost enchantment. When it enters, choose Teamer or Sultai. Teamer is whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, target player mills 4 cards, so you can choose yourself or your opponent. And when you play lands, and Sultai is you can play lands from your graveyard. So the Sultai mode, it doesn't seem that great, especially in standard. This Crucible of Worlds effect, we have that on other cards. Not the best, but the teamer side is kind of interesting to me. And this works, I think, with some interesting combos. In standard, we have flashback cards and now harmonized cards, so you could target yourself, right? With this, every time you play, say, example, the Otter Ball Antics, and then mill more Otter Ball Antics, for example, or things with flashback or things with harmonize into your graveyard. Maybe you're just playing a mill deck and trying to mill your opponent out with River Churn Monument, and this is pretty good, just playing cantrips and milling your opponent out. I think that could be decent strategy. We'll see. It is pretty efficient in what it does. I mean, if you played 3 mana and you milled 12 cards, that's a pretty good rate, right? So, um, you know, maybe even in modern mill, this could be decent. I don't even know. I don't play that deck, so could be, I guess that's usually like a blue-black deck. You could splash green, I guess, for it, but um, it would kind of enhance any other mill spells that you have that are instants and sorceries to add additional 4 mill to it, so could be decent there. But there's, I think, some interesting combo potential with this. The first thing I thought about when I thought about this card was maybe older formats. If you had like flashback cards that cost 0 mana, like Lava Dart, for example, Cabal Therapy, if you had this out and then you played a Lava Dart, you milled yourself for 4, and it milled over more Lava Darts or Cabal Therapies or Prismatic Strands, Dread Returns, things like that. These are the only ones I could think of that you can like flashback for free. There are things that like flashback for 1 mana, so you can kind of continue the chain. But like if you could just like go through your entire deck by flashing back things for free, sorceries and instants, that would be one way to mill your entire deck, right? And you could get all the effects of all the cards, so that could be pretty sweet too. So I don't know, that could be a potential. And maybe there's other instants and sorceries that you can cast from your graveyard for free that I'm not thinking about, but that's kind of an idea I had. The other thing is there's a 3-card infinite combo in modern, and actually in a historic this is legal too. And there's some other cards you can use with this, but Underworld Breach kind of breaks this card. Basically, with any instant or sorcery that's free, for example, like Strike It Rich, you can pay 1 red to create a treasure. You can use the treasure to cast it again from your graveyard. Mill 4 cards. Underworld Breach lets you use those cards. You actually net a card each time you're doing this from your graveyard. Lets you use those cards to escape back the Strike It Rich and just keep casting the Strike It Rich over and over again, mill your entire deck, and then like Grape Shot your opponent, Thassa's Oracle your opponent, and just win that way. So that's kind of a infinite, so to speak, combo. I mean, it's limited by the number of cards in your deck, but you can mill your entire deck basically with those 3 cards. Like Manamorphose would also work, things like that um, you can play for free, instants and sorceries. Would work. So this is kind of broken, I think, in a bit. Grinding Station is probably a little bit better, but this is another alternative in case Underworld Breach doesn't get banned. Probably will get banned. We'll see what happens. So it will be kind of a moot point if it gets banned, although it is maybe historic legal, and then you could play this in historic. So we'll see what happens. But this card it's interesting. When I first read it, I was like, wow, it's not that good, but it actually has quite potential for some standard mill strategies or some sort of just like infinite mill yourself strategy. So we'll see what happens with this one. Okay, next up we've got Tersa the Lightshatter, which is 3 mana for a 3/3 haste orc wizard, and when it enters, discard up to 2 cards and draw that many cards. And when it attacks, if there are 7 or more cards in your graveyard, exile a card at random from your graveyard. You can play that card this turn. So only this turn. It would be really good if you could play it like the next turn. Like sometimes they word it that way. But as it as it stands, 3 mana, 3/3 haste is a decent rate. That's okay. Like sometimes you play that like Screaming Nemesis. Screaming Nemesis has an additional ability, but so does this, which is to discard cards and draw cards. So that's a decent effect too. If you have things like Marauding Mako or the Monument, things like that want you to discard cards, or anything that you want to bring back, such as the Oculus, or if you're playing Zombify, bring back a big creature, things like that. That could be decent, right? It's also kind of nice with profs because it draws 2 cards potentially. So if you played profs on 2 and then you played this on 3, you could draw 2 more cards right away and make it like a 5/5 haste attacker. And then the additional ability is kind of like extra value tacked on, which is pretty sweet. If you're filling up your graveyard, then you can basically get a card draw every time you attack, additional card drawn every time you attack with it. So you can play things from exile. There are some cards that synergize from playing things from exile as well, so that could be interesting there. But yeah, seems pretty decent to me. Seems like a good rate, and it's doing a lot of really good things. It is a legend, which I guess could be a good thing, but overall probably not. Um, a more of a downside than a good thing with this card, but definitely an interesting one. And it's a wizard, so that could matter for like Wizard's Lightning in older formats too. I think it's a pretty good aggressive red card. It is competing again with other 3 drops in the red deck, so not sure if it's good enough, but it actually seems pretty good to me. So we'll see. Definitely a good one I think in different archetypes. Could also not just be in a red aggressive deck, but a reanimator deck too. Okay, let's go to the Clarion Conqueror, which is a 3 mana 3/3 for a dragon with flying, and it says active abilities of artifacts, creatures, and planeswalkers can't be activated. What an interesting line of text, and definitely kind of like a hate bear style card that you see on some of these white cards. Pretty good with like in older formats. I think this card is quite good because there's a lot of activated abilities of artifacts and creatures that you'd want to shut down, and even planeswalkers. That's pretty good against planeswalkers and standard if those become more popular. But in standard, I was thinking about this card. I was like, oh, you could play it on turn 2 with Landware Elves, but then you can't tap your Landware Elves after that for mana. It does shut down your opponent's cards, Landware Elves. Uh, so that's pretty good. Any creature, it doesn't say it as a mana ability. So like the new Mox too. Like I was also thinking, oh, you could play this with Mox. It would enable it. No, you can't tap the Mox because it shuts it down. It's a symmetrical effect. So it also shuts down like treasure tokens of your opponents, but also like your own deck. So you got to be aware of that. It's interesting with the Generous Plunderer. That if you give your opponent treasure tokens with it, then they can't use them, right? You could, well, you also can't use the ones that he gives you, but you could like say if you play that on turn 2, turn 3, you get a treasure. You could sacrifice your treasure to get an extra mana. Play this, um, and then attack, and then all the treasures that you give your opponent with the Generous Plunderer, they can't really sacrifice them. So that's kind of cute. Of course, they can remove either of those pieces, but it's a nice little interesting synergy, something to consider with like gifting your opponent stuff that they can't then activate. I think like Wishclaw Talisman, things like that could be interesting. But yeah, this card is pretty cool. And I think with Ancient Tomb and in Legacy, I think this card is going to be quite good because you can play it on turn 2 and it doesn't shut off your Ancient Tomb anymore. But the standard, we'll see. I mean, definitely a powerful effect, maybe more of a sideboard card, but really it's going to depend on the metagame and how many cards it's shutting down, and then you kind of have to build your deck around it so that it doesn't shut down any of your own stuff too. So an interesting card for sure. Okay, let's go to the Dragonologist. This card is pretty sweet. It's a 3 mana 1/3. human wizard, and when it enters, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You can reveal instant sorcery or dragon from among them. Put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And then it says untapped dragons you control have hexproof. That's interesting line of text right there. You could use this again as like a spell slinger deck or some way of finding like Abuelos Awakening that deck to get back um, omniscience. But I don't know. There are kind of like I think better enablers for just finding instants and sorceries that are a little bit more efficient. This does look 6 cards deep, which is pretty good. But the ability to find a dragon, I think, is what makes this really good. Um, and to give your dragons hexproof. So it is called Dragonologist after all, right? But things like Terror the Peaks, like that you really want to like stick into play. The problem with Terror the Peaks is that you just play it and then your opponent just like go for the first second. And you're like, oh, I just spent 5 mana. They do take 3, I guess, when they do that. But if you have this out, they have to remove this first and then remove your Terror Peaks. So it makes it much harder for them to remove it. Um, and then you can kind of just use the Terror Peaks to, dome your opponent with its ability. And they have to like leave up mana to kill it if you attack with it. So it creates an interesting kind of tension there. Um, with Shiko, this is quite good as well because Shiko, for multiple reasons. First, you can cast this to find your Shiko potentially. If this dies, then Shiko can bring it back. You get it back. Um, you get its ability again, and it gives Shiko itself hexproof. And then Shiko also has vigilance, so it never taps. So it is always going to have hexproof when it attacks. So those 2 cards synergize very well. Maybe with like Hitasugu and Kairi, if there's like a good combo around that. That 10 damage spell rotated from standard, I believe. So I'm not sure if there's just like an instant win with that anymore. But this could find Hitasuku itself or find the instant sorcery that you want to pair with it. So that could be interesting. Maybe with Magmatic Hellkite, I was thinking about making like a land destruction deck. You really want to find your Magmatic Hellkite and then play that, destroy your opponent's lands, and then like make copies of the Hellkite itself. So when you go to copy it, it has hexproof. That could be kind of sweet. So I don't know. I think this card's got a lot of uses. Definitely a good enabler for some strategies. And yeah, pretty sweet, good value card. Okay, next up we've got the Yathan Roadwatcher, which is 4 mana, Abzan colors, right? White, green, and black for a 3/3 human scout. And when it enters, if you cast it, you mill 4 cards, and when you do, return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So a helping hand kind of effect, and you kind of would play this with all the cards that you like with helping hand as well. This card is pretty efficient too, is in that it mills for 4, and you get the helping hand effect to bring back something, and you get a 3/3 body. So if you're playing you're getting 3 mana value worth of creatures from it. The mill for 4 and the 3/3 body is like 1 mana. So this is pretty good value, I would say, generally. Getting back like Souls of the Lost is kind of sweet because you're milling and bringing that back, and then probably making the Souls of the Lost bigger in the process of doing it. Oculus, maybe. That is like 4 colors, but maybe. Phyrexian Dragon Engine is kind of sweet as well. Those are all kind of like standard options. When you bring back the Dragon Engine, you can discard your hand and then draw additional 3 cards. So that's kind of nice synergy there. Greasefang, I think this could be pretty good in Greasefang in Pioneer because it can mill additional vehicles and then also bring Greasefang itself back, and then Greasefang itself brings back the vehicle, and then you just kind of go off from there. So I think this card is pretty powerful and definitely we'll see some play in Standard or Pioneer. I could imagine it having some uses. So yeah, definitely an interesting card to kind of keep an eye on, and this guy is keeping an eye on of these other cards too. So that's a pretty cool art in this one as well. All right, let's go to the Avenger of the Fallen, which is a 3 mana 2/4 human warrior with Death Touch. Mobilize X, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Ooh, so Mobilize again is when it attacks, you create that many 1/1 red warrior creature tokens, and then you sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step. So this one is just like you could play this just in a mono black version. The other ones had white in their mana costs, so you could play this in sort of like a self mill mono black deck or black blue deck or something like that. Um, this card can kind of get out of hand pretty quickly. I feel like if you have enough creatures in your graveyard. I mean, obviously, if you have no creatures in your graveyard, it's a pretty bad card. But if you have a bunch, it's very powerful in what it's doing. Again, the creatures get sacrificed at the end of turn, so things like Vengeful Blood Witch would trigger this potentially. Would trigger all the token sacrificing. You could get additional value out of that. Things that want to sacrifice, like Bart, things like that. If you really want to fill up your graveyard, you could go like Jace. Like play this on 3 Jace on the next turn and mill yourself for 15. Maybe like if you milled like 7 creatures or something like that, then you attack for a bunch of damage. It is kind of like the Urborg Lorgoyf in the sense that it counts the number of creatures, but the problem with that card is that like it doesn't have any evasion, and this kind of has a built-in evasion in the sense that all the creatures, some of them are going to get through for damage. It's kind of like it has trample in a sense, um, but it also, you could do other things like Vengeful Blood Witch, or if you have any anthem effects, obviously it pumps all the 1/1s. That kind of gets out of hand pretty quickly too. So an interesting card, definitely has a very high ceiling, low floor, but if you build around it, I feel like it could be very, very powerful. Death Touch is nice too, and the body as a 2/4, pretty hard to kill with some removal and standard. So yeah, I think this one definitely has a chance. Okay, next up we've got the River Wheel Sweep. So this is a hybrid cost, blue or 2, red or 2, white or 2. Tap target creature, put 3 stun counters on it, and then exile top 2 cards of your library until the end of your next turn. You can play those cards. You choose one of them, and then you can play one of them. So some card selection, basically like drawing a card. The only reason I'm pointing this card out is because its mana cost, basically. I mean, it's fairly efficient in what it's doing already. But if you're playing like Up the Beanstalk in like a 5-color deck, and this draws an additional card, that's kind of insane. Or with things like Discover, like Quintorius combo, Trumpeting, Carnosaur combos, things like that, where you're trying to really manage the casting costs of all your cards because this has a mana value of 6. Um, this could be a decent option there. Basically, it's like removing a creature of your opponent's for at least 3 turns, and then also drawing a card and getting a little card selection. So it's pretty decent if you're playing those colors. And yeah, we'll see. That's the only reason I'm pointing it out, because interesting mana cost that could, um, you know, interact interesting with other cards. Okay, and then last up, I've got a collection of other cards that were spoiled these last couple days that are pretty cool. I mean, these designs are awesome. The cards are pretty sweet, but they're all like very reactive cards. I couldn't think of any like sweet, cool combos or synergies. A lot of these are like depending on what your opponent is doing. So we've got the Fang Keeper's Familiar, 4 mana for a 3/3, Snake with Flash. When it enters, you choose one. Gain 3 life, Surveil 3. So nice for like a graveyard strategy deck or just card selection, life gain. I mean, some good value there. You can destroy enchantments. There's a lot of enchantments in standard you want to destroy. Counter target creature spell. That's pretty good. So all the modes on this are pretty decent. Some good value. I mean, I think if you're going to synergize with this card, if you're playing like a Blink cards, things that like this town, things like that bounce it back to your hand could be interesting. Could use its ability again. So you could do that, or just make copies of it. There's like a clone that has flash. I can't remember the name of it right now. The cycling clone that has flash that could be kind of cool to copy this again and use its ability again. So a decent card, could see some play. I would be surprised. And then we got the New Way, which is 5 mana. Jeskai, the next time a source of your choice would deal damage to you this turn, prevent that damage. When damage is prevented this way, the New Way deals that much damage to the source's controller, and you draw that many cards. So um, the Deflecting Palm is kind of the card that this is kind of referring back to, but this basically depends on your opponent attacking you with a giant creature, and that doesn't happen in every game. So it's really kind of more of a sideboard card, I would say. It can certainly be a sweet card in Commander, maybe because there's a lot more choices of what your opponent's doing, but you really is very dependent on your opponent. You could like gift your opponent like a creature or something, and then use this or something like that, or like pump your opponent's creatures somehow, and then that you draw more cards. But it's an interesting card. I don't think it'll see like much play because it's so situational, but it will lead to some fun stories. So I'm glad they printed something like this. And then Death Begets Life, which is 8 mana, very expensive. Destroy all creatures and enchantments, and then draw a card for each permanent destroyed this way. So definitely has potential to like be again pretty good in Commander. I think just destroy everything and draw a bunch of cards could be decent. But like I don't know, in any 60 card format, are you going to pay 8 mana for this? You're probably just dead, right? For that, maybe in like a Beans mirror match or something like that. This could be decent. I don't know, but yeah, I don't know. Let me know in the comments below if you have any other ideas for these cards, something I'm missing with them, but they just seem kind of very reactive to what your opponent's doing and kind of a bit, at least the last two seem a bit slow and probably not going to see much play. So those are my ideas and thoughts for them. Those are the ideas and thoughts for the last 2 days of Tarkir Dragonstorm spoilers. What do you guys think about this set? Any cool combos you're excited for so far? Anything I missed? Love to hear about it in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching, and thank you to everyone who supported the channel, anyone who's joined the channel for membership. Huge shout out. Really appreciate you. Really keeps me motivated and going with this channel, and just means a lot to me. So thanks so much. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video.